Okay, good morning, everyone. Those who are here and those who are at home or watching a little later. If you're watching a little later, you might be confused, but please don't be confused because the topic is Passover. Even though we are only tomorrow, well, it's today Wednesday, right? Yes. Tomorrow, welcoming the month of Shvat, which is the New Year of the Trees. The topic is Passover because of the Parsha this week, which is Va'era, which we have many different topics we could have chosen. But it is Passover, and actually this reading will be read again on Pesach. Jay Harwood, our amazing ritual director, is here. I'm not sure which day this Parsha is read during Pesach, but one of those days, this Parsha Va'era is chosen. You have just a quick synopsis, a couple of the first plagues. You have the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, which is an intense theological discussion of free will, where the question is, who hardened Pharaoh's heart? If it was God, then did Pharaoh have any free will in terms of his actions? If it was not, then what is God's role within the universe with the odyssey of good and evil? But I'm going to go even further back, and that is the 4 cups of wine. We're going to look at the ritual of the 4 cups of wine, the well-known connection of biblically why the rabbis say we have 4 cups of wine, and hopefully discover that it seems like we should have 5 cups of wine, and why we don't have that, or why we do, just in a different form. So we're going to look at page 351. It's the beginning of the portion of Parshat Va'era. Just a couple of things from Parshat Shmot, which is last week, which I find very interesting. The first person to call the people of Israel, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, to use the word Am, nation? Anybody know? It was Pharaoh. So it's interesting that the person who could see our strength and nationhood was in fact not us, but we weren't self-aware enough, but it was somebody who felt threatened by us to then call us Am, which then became Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel. Yesterday we had a beautiful talk by Ilan Carr, the Israeli-American Council CEO, and he talked about what nationhood means, both to Israelis and also to Americans, and in this interesting time that we're living in as well. So the first couple of sentences in Parshat Va'era go like this. God spoke to Moses and said to him, Ani Adonai, I am God. And again, we have to remember the point in history where we are. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about Rabbi Daniel Hartman and the difference between the Genesis Jew and the Exodus Jew, where the Genesis Jew is just being Jewish because that's just who we are as an identity. And the Exodus Jew is the obligation to create a life of value. And here we are in this moment, basically in bondage. Last week, Moses is born, sees the burning bush. And now we're going right into our slavery narrative, also perhaps appropriate, especially this coming week of Unity Shabbat and Martin Luther King weekend. For those who are here and those who are watching, please join us on Friday when we really share the liberation narrative that we share between us and the African American community. Pastor J.P. Foster will be here from Faithful Central Bible Church, and on Sunday we'll also be sharing in their worship services in Inglewood as well. So here God speaks to Moses and said, I'm God. Okay, but what does that mean? Why in that moment? What does it mean? Va'era el Abraham. I appeared to who? To our ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, the El Shaddai. And if you look, God has many, many, many different names. When we teach classes to those converting to Judaism, we do one class fully on the names of God. And most people are shocked that I thought God is God. But God has a name like El Shaddai. God has a name like Adonai, Elohim. When we read the 13 attributes of God, those are other names of God. El Rachum V'Chanun, God who is one of mercy and compassion. But also, God is called Ish Milchama, where we read every single morning before Milchamocha, God is a man of war. So we have all of these names of God in different contexts. I like explaining it that right now, in this moment, I'm a rabbi, but 10 minutes ago, I was a husband and a father, and when I call my sister, I'm a brother. When I call my parents, I'm a son, but I'm still just me. And each one of us carry these different identities in different contexts. And the same is true with our thinking of how we relate to God, meaning each one of you and us is probably having a different relationship with God at this moment, and people around the world as well, depending on the situation that they are in. But God is God, and of course, we learn that God is everywhere. El Shaddai, meaning the Almighty One, but I did not make myself known to them by Adonai, right? He didn't say, my name is Adonai. In fact, last week we learned what was God's name? Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, the most frustrating answer in the Torah. Tell the people that I will be what I will be. That's a satisfactory answer for a 2-year-old, but not for anybody with the sophistication of who are you? I will be what I will be. And so it's not sophisticated at the same time. It's the most sophisticated thing, because another name for God is Ein Sof, which means there is no end. And so here I will be what I will be. There is no end. I'm everything. It's complicated, and that's why actually God often appears as a personified form, because the only way that we can see God is the way that we can relate to another human being. So what do we say every time we Shacharit service begins on Shabbat morning? The cantor leads us, Shochenad Marom, and then Al Kisei Ram V'Nisa, that God is seated on a throne on high. Right? In fact, on the high holidays, the cantor chants with gusto a long version of thank you, Hamelech, that God is a king sitting on the throne, right? That is a way that we can relate to God, even though we know that God is not just a simple king or piece of royalty. And so, now we get to these 4/5 words. And the question is sort of the chicken and the egg question. Did the wine cups come first, and then the rabbi said, let's go find verses in the Torah that relate to this theme? Or did the rabbis look into the Torah and say, we're going to create the ceremony of the Seder, and then we're going to have 4 cups of wine, because in the Torah, specifically here in portion Vayera, it says these words. So, Vagam hakimoti et briti itam. I established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan. Again, how true these words ring out, or how troubling these words as we're watching the events over the last over 90 days, now going to the 100th day since October 7th. I have a covenant with the people in the land, et eretz megurehem asher garuva, the land in which they lived in. Begam ani shamati et naakat b'nei Yisrael, and this is fascinating in terms of, right, God says, I'm with you, I have a covenant with you. And what do the people say? And God says, I've heard the difficulties, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage. I've remembered my covenant. And the people say in verse, fast forward to verse 9. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, right? Moses goes to the people and says, God has a covenant with us. We're going to be okay. And what do they say? Or what does Moses hear from them? V'lo shamu el Moshe. They couldn't hear him. Mikotze ruach. Because their spirit was crushed by this hard work, by this hard labor, right? On October 8th, I don't think we could have probably said the same thing, right? But God's with us. What do you mean God's with us? Mikotze ruach. Our spirits are crushed. Actually, Rabbi Wolpe is in Israel right now. There's missions going every single week from different organizations. And there's a sort of shift right now, right? For the first 90 days, or first, 50, 60 days, it was just staring at destruction. And now it's, who are we as a nation? What will we do to build? It's both memorializing and also creating what can become of tomorrow as well. And so when you look at Vayera, right, it was, it's the Jewish slave narrative of Egypt. And then you see what happens today. These words can be as applicable today, which you cannot say often about the Torah. And so their spirits are crushed, but God's not going to give up. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor, God says to Moses, Bo daber al Paro melech Mitzrayim, the famous words, Vishalach et bnei Israel, let my people go. Vaydaber Moshe lifnei Adonai lemor, and he says, no problem. Okay. We are going to look at verse 6. So let's look at these words that refer to God taking the people out of Egypt. So we know that the Torah does not mince words, and when they use a word, they mean it. And when they use a word, for instance, doubly, they really mean to emphasize something. So for instance, if somebody is put to death, for instance, they say not just put to death, but mot yumat, They really are put to death. But in this case, the Torah is using 4 different words. The first word that we see in verse 6 is hotzeti, right? We probably know the root of that word from the song Dayenu, Ilu Ilu Hotzianu, Hotzianu Mimitraim, that God took us out of Egypt. And let's look at the English translations as well, because verse 6 says, it doesn't say I took you out of Egypt, it says I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians. Let's look at the commentary in the bottom of the page, and you see the commentators here in the Eitz Chaim actually focus on the different words. Let's go through the words first. Verse 6. The first is vehotzeti. It says free you, but really it means I will take you out of Egypt. And the first word on page 353, top of the page, vehitzalti etchem. In my translation, it means, and God will save. In this case, it's redeem. But what are the ambulances in Israel? United Hatzalah. What does Hatzalah mean? It's hitzalti. I will save you. In this case, they translate it as redeem. The next one, viga'alti. Here they translate it as deliver you, right? Deliver, save. So that difference in translation. The third word is ga'alti, right? In this case, I think we both get it right. It's redeem. What do we say, the blessing before the Amidah? Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. We should redeem. We praise God for the Redeemer of Israel. In fact, if you look at the themes of the Torah and the Bible, and even you can look at it in a literary way, there's basically 3 themes that go through. There's creation, there's revelation, and redemption. And you can sort of see that in that are the 3 motifs in many of our biblical stories. Whether it's the whole Torah, right? Genesis, creation, Shemot, Exodus, Revelation, at the burning bush, Mount Sinai, etc., and redemption after the 5 books of Moses. When we get to the book of Joshua, we enter the land. Or you can actually those 3 motifs specifically in different stories, right? In an Abraham and Isaac Akedah story, in a Joseph story that we just read for the last few weeks. Creation, revelation, redemption. And in fact, it mirrors our services, our prayers, and that's what the rabbis put in. Creation, what do we say right after the Baruch Hu? What's the blessing? Yotzer Or, the creator of Or, light and darkness. Revelation, the Shema, and redemption, the Ga'al Yisrael. Right? The Shacharit service, which most people are not here for the Torah service, that has the same motifs. Creation, revelation, redemption. We need those pieces. So, v'ga'alti etchem, that God's going to redeem us. Right? It could have just said, God took the people out of Egypt. But the Torah is spending a lot of time using many different words explaining this. Okay, next word, velakachti. That means I took. Lakachti etchem li la'am. The lakachti in modern Hebrew is I take, right? I take this chumash. I take this phone with me, whatever. I take, simply take. V'ha'iti lachem le'elohim. So, right, the 4 words, hotzeti, hitzalti, ga'alti, lakachti. It all means, quote unquote, the same thing, but let's look at the commentary. On page 352 at the bottom, the stages of redemption, I will free you from physical enslavement in Egypt. Okay, so now they say, each one represents to a different type of taking. The first one, I will free you, is physical enslavement. Now you have to remember the difference between Passover and Shavuot. Passover is our physical freedom. Shavuot is our spiritual freedom. And we know, it's interesting, I compare this to the Arab Spring in 2011 as opposed to the Exodus in Egypt. Right? When we got out of Egypt, we still weren't really the children of Israel. We needed a constitution. We needed a document. Once we had the Torah and obligations and rules and structure, then only could we actually understand what it meant to be obligated to each other and to God. What you saw often in the Arab Spring, or you see, I'm listening to a lot of podcasts about democracy, and for instance, in countries where the United States comes in and puts democracy in a place where sometimes maybe democracy won't work, And I'm not just talking about Gaza in 2005, I'm talking about Iraq and all these different places, Afghanistan, right? Then when they leave, democracy is not necessarily there. And then compared it to a place like the United Arab Emirates, where it's not the democracy that we know, but it's a tolerant society. And so what happened in the Arab Spring is everybody runs out into the streets and is happy for their freedom against totalitarian rule, but there's no constitution or obligations in order to then how to live their lives. And so we can get our physical freedom, but if we only had Passover and no Shavuot, then we would be in trouble. We probably wouldn't be here today because we wouldn't have this, what would be living according to. So we have, if it just said, Hotzeti etchem, they took us out of Egypt, that wouldn't, Dayenu. We say Dayenu, it would have been enough, but it really would not have been enough. We needed that next step. Liberation, right? What does it mean to liberate? I will redeem you. What is that? Or sorry, deliver you. I will deliver you, the Hitzalti, psychological mindset of being a slave, which might persist even if you have been physically liberated, right? Even when we, quote unquote, get out of jail, when we are no longer hostage. I mean, look at the hostage families and the testimonies that they are given, right? Some are speaking, some are not, obviously. We're not going to know for years, probably a lifetime, of what that psychologically did to them. In fact, you see, right? Many of those survivors, both of the Nova Festival and the hostage families, are coming to the United States to get psychological help, to deal with the trauma, to be out of the physical surroundings that they were in. And so to be delivered means get out of the psychological mindset. And therefore, the people that ended up at Mount Sinai, and we read this a lot in the Torah, that generation had to sort of cycle out in order to understand what it meant to really be a free people. I look at it backwards in terms of me personally and my own generation. Anti-Semitism, I would say, really understand it until the last year, right? Where I heard about it from my parents, but really from my grandparents. I read about it in other places, but then when it happens to you in your own neighborhood, in your own driveway, in your own community, then it's a different type of deliverance that we're looking for. We're now all, I would say, in a psychological mindset that we were not in. And I just read a report by the ADL last night, right, that over the last 3 months, there were more anti-Semitic incidents in this country than there were in the entire year of 2022. And we still have, obviously, 9 months to go in that as well. So that's that piece. Physical, psychological. I will redeem you, Goel, so that you think of yourselves as free people. So that one sort of goes with the delivering, right? You have to psychologically get out of it, and then you must say, I am a free person, and if I am a free person, what will that look like? In speaking with Elon Carr yesterday, right, he talked about free speech versus hate speech, specifically anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and he said that we as free people we should have the free speech as much as the other people who are doing hate speech. So instead of them defining us, we should define them of what it means to actually be a free people. So when you have that psychological mindset, then you're able to be free and actually express yourself that way. I will take you. What does that mean? Here, taking is not a physical aspect, but into a special relationship with me, for that is the ultimate goal of your liberation. If we got out of Egypt and we were psychologically okay and we were a free people, it still would be different until we have the theological component of lakachti etchem li. I will take you with me, meaning in a relationship. That is the ultimate aspect. Finally, and this is the interesting thing, there's a fifth word here found in verse 8. Veheveti etchem el haaretz. The fifth word finally leads to the going into the land of Israel. Veheveti etchem el haaretz, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give Abraham. Of course, that goes back to Lech Lecha in the book of Genesis. And then, this is the commentary, right? This is not from today, by the way. This is a long time ago. Only when they have their own land can they become the special people they are summoned to be. Only there will they have the duty and opportunity to translate the ideals of the Torah into the realities of daily life and fashion the model society from which all nations will be able to learn. Very different reading of this parsha than last year when we read it, than every other Passover, at least in my own personal lifetime. So why then do we only have 4 cups and not a 5th cup? And I want to share some commentaries with you about that. Of all the items that I'm reading a commentary here, of all the items that the Passover Seder comes in groups of 4, the 4 cups of wine are probably the most well-known. Other 4, the 4 questions, the 4 children, right? We can have a whole other section on the 4 children. I love that one. It's actually a beautiful picture in a Haggadah of 4 books. And I always ask people, which child is which, right? There's the Chacham, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask questions. And the first picture that you see is a book that is burning. And usually a child will say, that's the wicked one, it's on fire. And somebody else will say, no, that's the wise one. Burning with the desire of learning. There's an empty one which says, oh, that's the Chacham, you don't even need a book. And they say, no, that's the Rasha, they don't even know how to read what's in the book. And so this gray area of the cups of wine, the children, the questions, that actually is the point of the Seder. The point of the Seder is to continue to ask questions and not to have an answer. So, I want to look first at the rabbinic aspect of the cups of wine and how important those cups of wine are. It says in the Mishnah, on the eve of Passover, close to the after, no one must eat until nightfall, which, right, you're supposed to be so hungry for that first pizza matzah that it actually tastes good, at least for the first night. Even the poorest person in Israel must not eat unless he reclines. That's how important the Seder is, to be a free person, right? Even a person in poverty must really try to recline on that night. And they must give him no fewer than 4 cups of wine, even if they receive tzedakah from the charity plate, right? To recline, to be free, and to have these 4 cups of wine is so important that you basically need to do anything you can in order to have those cups of wine. The Jerusalem Talmud, which we don't focus on often, our Talmud is the Babylonian Talmud. Ironically, we're talking about the land of Israel, but our rabbinic tradition was written in exile in Babylonia, which is now Iraq. So even today in yeshivas, you study the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, and Jerusalem Talmud sort of is brought in like laterally. But here's a teaching from the Jerusalem Talmud, which gives the reasons for 4 cups of wine. The first, of course, is what we just went over in detail, the 4 different words. From where do we know the 4 cups? Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rav, corresponding to the 4 expressions of salvation. So this teaching is brought both in the Babylonian Talmud and in the Jerusalem Talmud. Although not considered the primary reasons for the 4 cups, the Talmud continues with 3 more possible reasons. And we want to look at these, and these are the ones that are not usually talked about. Another idea of the 4 cups corresponds to the 4 cups of Pharaoh, right? Not the 4 cups of God doing things good for the Jewish people, but 4 cups of Pharaoh. And this refers to in the book of Genesis, chapter 40, verse 11, the cup of Pharaoh was in my hand, and I squeezed him into the cup of Pharaoh, and I placed the cup unto the palm of Pharaoh, and you will place the cup of Pharaoh. So this idea of kos paro, which we read in the Joseph story. Again, a different Pharaoh, we believe, than the one in Egypt, but there was a cup there, and so we're connecting. There's a rabbinic technical term that we say, ein mukdam umuchar b'Torah. There's no early or late in the Torah. My 10-year-old was just asking us the other day. The Torah doesn't make sense because these people are talking to these people and they can never have met each other. In Torah world, it makes complete sense because there's no chronological time. You can have Abraham and Moses basically in the same room as the Midrash does, and they're interacting with each other. It's a living document, and so even though the 4 cups are not referring to the Exodus, it's a different Pharaoh in Genesis, it's the same narrative. Rabbi Levi says, corresponding to the 4 kingdoms, the Malachot, and the rabbis say, corresponding to the 4 punishments that God will pour upon the nations of the world in the future. And most of these are taken from the book of Jeremiah and the book of Psalms. So again, the classic example is God saved us in 4 different ways. We have 4 cups of wine. Let's drink and be happy. But to know that there are different interpretations out there that are available in terms of what these 4 cups represent. Now we get to the 5th cup. 1 second. Heveti, I will bring you. Why do the rabbis miss this opportunity to add that 5th cup when the 5th cup is the ultimate redemption of having the people back into the land which we were taken out of? It could be, Heveti, potentially be viewed as a description of the Exodus in Egypt. This author says, is it possible that some would have used this as a rationale for a 5th cup? Compare the passages below, and we're going to see in just a moment. With regard to the 4th cup, one completes the Hallel over it and recites the great Hallel. So it seems like 4 cups was the big thing. Tomorrow we'll be saying Hallel for Rosh Chodesh, right? The different psalms of praise that we say each month and on holidays. Sometimes it's called a Chetzi Hallel, a half a Hallel, depending on the holiday. But on that 4th cup, that's when we say basically B'tzeit Yisrael, all the great Hallel. So it seems like 4 cups. But there is a commentary in the Talmud on a rabbi named the Rif, Rabbi Yosef Alfasi, and he says, on the 5th cup of wine, one recites the great Hallel. Well, if he says on the 5th cup of wine, one recites the great Hallel, what must it mean? That somebody, sometime, was having 5 cups of wine, and that was part of the Seder, right? That's the beauty of the Talmud, that you rediscover minority opinions, and if there are minority opinions, it probably meant, especially for rituals, that it actually was happening, right? In fact, the CJLS, the conservative movements, the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, they do often sort of recover these minority opinions and say, well, this was happening. What is the context of that happening? And what's the context of the Jewish life that we are living now? Maybe sometimes that can actually be reintroduced. So the Rif says, you know what? It was probably happening, and that's why we do it. Our rabbis learned, this is another commentary on the same piece of Talmud by the Rosh. He says this, we say the great Hallel over the 5th cup. These are the words of Rabbi Tarfon, which we just learned. And there are those that say, this is a beautiful thing. In fact, I'm wearing black because I have a funeral today. And what do we open up a funeral with? Psalm 23. And what do we say at the end of Psalm 23? Like, Adonai Roi lo achsar, first of all, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack, I shall not want. But we say, Kosi revaya, that our cup shall be overflowing, right? 5 cups is the overflow. We say the great Hallel on the 4th cup, as who mentioned the name of the 5th cup, as if it is coming to say, and here they say, the 5th cup is optional, and if he wants, he should do a 5th cup, and this is how you should say it. One who wants to do a 5th cup should say the great Hallel upon it. And then they explain how there's different textual variants. As did Rabbi Yosef Tov Elam. He wrote that if the desire is to drink, he should make a 5th cup. It is implied from these words that it is otherwise forbidden to drink after the 4 cups, and it is a wonder as from where we have this. It says later, we may not eat an afikomen, which is a dessert, after we finish the Korban Pesach, which means not to eat, but to drink is permitted. So there's a back and forth between the rabbis of what we should do, the 4th cup or the 5th cup. And so, what is our 5th cup today? We have 4 cups of wine, but what is our 5th cup? We do have one. Exactly. Eliyahu Hanavi, right? We have the 5th cup as a joint cup on the table, as a 5th cup, which really represents Elijah, which what does Elijah represent? It really is redemption, right? And so, and by the way, how do we know that we shouldn't drink after the 4th cup? It says in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law, after the 4 cups, they are not allowed to drink wine, but rather water. These rabbis are very smart. The law of all drinks besides water is like that of concerning wine, and one who is delicate or greatly desires to drink may drink that 5th cup of wine. So I just want to go for a moment to conclude about Elijah and what it means when we open up that door. Also, by the way, today in a more egalitarian sense, there's also Miriam's cup as well. So maybe there's a 6th cup or a fifth shared cup. But when we welcome Elijah into our house, we are welcoming in that piece of redemption. And so this is actually by Rabbi Naomi Levy from the Shuva, who writes, the only guest we can safely invite into our homes tonight is Elijah. Elijah the prophet is the one who will merit the Mashiach. Our tradition offers many visions of what the Mashiach will look like, right? When we look into our prayer book, the old conservative movement prayer book still had the traditional liturgy that after the Amidah says, She'yabana Beit HaMikdash Mehera V'Yameinu, that the temple will be rebuilt speedily in our days. When will that happen? Only when, of course, the Mashiach comes. That piece was sort of removed from the end of the Amidah, but it is still there before the Kaddish de Rabbanan on page 13 in the daily prayer book, and we have a choice of what we want to say. If we don't have that theology, then you can say the other one that says, Aaron the high priest, Rodev Shalom, seeks peace and pursues peace. And so when we drink that fifth cup of wine, we realize that it's not only for us, but actually it is for everyone. And so we're only a couple of months away from Passover. Tu B'Shvat really presents the spring season. This year it's a little further because it's a leap year, and we're going to have 2 months of Adar, and so we'll have Shvat starting tomorrow. We'll have Tu B'Shvat, which will bring in the season of the trees and blossoming, and then we'll have 2 months of Adar, one with Purim, and then we'll get into the Passover season. But I think it's a beautiful and heart-wrenching way to look at the Seder this year of what did these 4 cups represent in the times of Egypt? What did the 4 cups represent in the times of trouble? And I mean the Inquisition, I mean the Shoah, I mean pogroms. And then I think, when we say, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu yatsa miMitzrayim, that in every generation we are obligated to see ourselves as if we went out of Egypt. And there are moments in our lives when those as if moments become real moments. COVID, I would say, was one of them, when we were all alone and we had our Seders on Zooms for that first year. And then 2 years later, we had our Seders outside. And then last year, many of us moved back inside. It was a liberating moment to bring back the community together. I think this year's Passover will be as powerful post-October 7th, both with all of the empty seats, but also that fifth cup of wine that when we open that door, the only safe guest we really want to walk into is Eliyahu. But we don't, al samchim al hanes, as we say in Hanukkah, we don't rely on miracles. It takes that lakachti etchem li. When God says, I will take you with me, it takes that partnership between us, each other, God, and humanity to make that redemption come true. And so it's only January, but we are in the book of Exodus. For the next couple of weeks here, we're going to be deep into the Passover story. Next week, we'll read about more of the plagues. But as you open up your Torah this week, just think about those 4 cups. And I would say, God willing, by Passover, we should have a desire to drink more. On Purim, we say that you should drink, that you don't know the difference between Mordechai and Haman. On Passover, I think we should, God willing, be able to drink for simcha, for joy and redemption as well. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month as we do a mitzvah of the month. Have a wonderful day and an early Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Get off of the...
Has a much more intimate meaning, and a lot of times in the Torah, it's the word that's used